Thanks everybody for joining us today. This is the second attempt here to let Mark talk about his incredible project, the Satchel project. If you don't know Mark, and I'm sure you probably all do, you'll know him as the president emeritus of the board of directors. He started the bio project for SABR. He founded the baseball cards committee and has won, I think, almost every award and honor that SABR issues. So um, I just having a little bit of knowledge and seeing his presentation at the convention about this project, it epitomizes why I love Saber to have somebody that goes in and he'll explain it, but is so interested in detailing so much information about the life of a certain player, cataloging places that he was, as much information as possible is available to show where he was on certain dates, pitching, getting married, whatever it is. But Mark will obviously be able to explain that. So why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thanks, John, for that. So yes, so the point of this project, in a nutshell, is to create essentially a life log for Satchel Paige, and I think that I thought that, I've read a lot about Paige, like many of you probably have, and there's been a few outstanding books written about him and whatever, but they tend to be focused, and this is not a criticism, on sort of trying to get the forest for Paige and not really the trees. And I thought that with all of the newspaper archives that are now available, that I might be able to go through and sort of figure out where Satchel was pitching all those years that he was wandering around the country and as a sort of a hired gun, especially after his major league career was over. And I wanted to see how much I could really document for myself. And I started off literally trying to figure out, like, I said, well, this is kind of like what I did with the Bio project. I just said, like, let's make this project huge and then, like, worry about the parameters later. And I just said, well, I'm just going to document everything that he did. So if he, spoke at a Lions club, I'm going to write that down and have this big giant spreadsheet. And I made quite a bit of progress with that, but then I decided that I would focus on the one thing that people most care about, which is the actual pitching appearances that he made in his career. And so for me, the log that I've really been focused on the last year or so is all of the games that Satchel Paige pitched as a professional. So if he was on the mound pitching and he was getting paid for it, so that would include games where he's pitching in the Negro League World Series, and this would also include games where he was sort of barnstorming as a 55-year-old and showing up at to pitch against a local semi-pro team. I made the entire log as detailed as I could. So what I was interested in documenting essentially was the date, the place, as much as I could, and then all the information that I could gather about the game in terms of how many innings he pitched and how many runs he gave up and all the usual sort of data. And from there, I just wanted to see, how far I could go. So I would like to share my screen. And how do I do that again?
You see down at the bottom on the bar, there should be a button that says share.
There sure is. I've done it a million times, so you would think that, eventually. Hang on. On my app now.
You're up. Yeah.
And now I just need to
And play from the start the slideshow.
play from the start. And I also yeah, that's good. So that works.
It works. I can see it.
Okay. So at the recent SABR convention in Dallas, I did a presentation about this project, which I call the Satchel Project. And the purpose of this version is it's similar to that, except I'm going to spend a little bit of time focusing on the time that he pitched in Chicago and specifically. And this ends up being kind of almost like the perfect place to have a talk like this because although Paige never, sort of famously pitch for any of the, the big teams in Chicago. Or he did a little bit, but not much. Um, he did pitch in Chicago a lot, and he pitched, at all the various phases of his career. Um, he would always show up in Chicago. I think it was a city that meant a lot to him. I think he may have even lived there in the late 30s, but I haven't been able to figure that out. So um, yeah, so that's what I'm doing here today. So as a high level, I'm not going to talk too much about the high level just because this would be several books worth of a talk. But you probably know he pitched for a long time in the Negro Leagues. His three primary teams were the Black Barons and the Crawfords and the Monarchs. And you've probably seen pictures of him in the uniforms of all those teams. It was always more complicated than that because he was always being rented out to pitch a game here or a game there. He also pitched in the winter in different places, including outside the country. He barnstormed in the off season kind of on his own, so he was doing a lot more than just pitching for these three teams. And then, of course, he pitched for the Indians and the Browns in the American League for a handful of years after, a little bit after Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. And then I mentioned that he also pitched 3 years for the Miami Marlins in the International League. That was his last real sort of stable gig that he had. And then he kept pitching. I mean, he was pitching for a team, the Indianapolis Clowns, in 1967 when he was 61 years old. So, and he really didn't take any years off. He was always pitching. So that's sort of the start, I guess. And then I want to forward my screen. Here we go. So the purpose of my talk, my last talk that I did in Dallas, was just to figure out like how many games did he actually pitch. Paige used to talk about that a lot. He claimed 2,500 games. Um, at the time, the major league record was 907 by Cy Young. But of course, I'm going well beyond the major leagues here, so it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison. But Paige said he pitched 2,500 games. He did exaggerate a lot about his situation. He said he pitched 50 no hitters. I have found four. Um, I don't think I'm missing 46, honestly. Um, but yeah, so that's Paige. Um, so so in Chicago, probably the most famous story about Paige pitching in Chicago was a game that he pitched against Babe Ruth. And if you want to know about the story, you can find it on YouTube because it's a story that Buck O'Neill used to talk about. And there's a couple different versions of Buck O'Neill telling this story on YouTube. And I put South Side of Chicago in quotes because that's what O'Neill said. He didn't name the place. I assume it could have been either Comiskey Park or Shoreling Field, which is right nearby. He doesn't say. And if this game happened, it was the only time that they ever faced each other. And O'Neill claims that Ruth hit a massive home run off Paige, and that Paige met him at home plate and shook his hand. And I mean, he has a pretty elaborate story about it. Um, I like Buck O'Neill as much as everyone. I don't actually believe that this happened. I mean, this sounds harsh. Other people besides me have looked for this game. Page wrote in his memoir that one of his regrets that he never faced Ruth. Um, the times that they would have overlapped in terms of being able to have a game like this, they were both incredibly famous people, and the idea that Ruth could have come into Chicago, played a game against anybody, let alone against Satchel Paige, and have it escape the notice of all of the daily papers, it just doesn't make any sense, really, that this happened. But nonetheless, um, I needed to get that in the talk because it's actually I mean, O'Neill's a good storyteller, and he tells the story well, so I'll give him that. So to answer the question of how many games he pitched, if you grew up with the baseball encyclopedia or whatever as a kid, you knew that he pitched, or if you studied his page, he pitched 179 games in the American League, and that includes the game he pitched for the Kansas City A's in 1965, of course. And then he pitched when Seamheads published their data in 2021. Of his time in the Negro and in the major Negro leagues. This is after SABR and Major League Baseball had deemed these as being major leagues. They added another 290 games. That's as of the last time I checked, 290 more major league games for Paige. So now we're up to 469. So that's where I started, and I got the logs from Baseball Reference, and I got the logs from Seamheads from Kevin Johnson. So I had a big spreadsheet with 469 games in it, and that's kind of where the project started. How can I add to the 469? And I did this largely through newspaper research. I have subscriptions to a number of these things you can get via SABR via your SABR membership. I have a few extra ones, and I just started at the beginning of his professional career. Um, Even before that, because I was looking for, he supposedly pitched in 1924 and 1925 for for the Mobile, I think Tigers, and as a semi-pro a player. I've not found any evidence of that, which doesn't mean it's not true. It's almost certainly is true, but it just those papers are not digitized to the extent that I can access them. However, the what is deemed the beginning of his career was when he signed with the Chattanooga White Sox, which was a in the Negro Southern League in 1927. No, 1926. And so his centennial as a professional is coming up next year, which I will be trumpeting, you can bet. Um, so I started looking through, I started with newspapers.com and I just looked for Satchel Paige starting in 1926 and all the way up to essentially when he died in 1982, because you never know with Paige, he might try and get a game in. Um, and then I did this for all the other services as well, looking for Paige under various spellings of Satchel and Paige and everything else. So it was kind of a brute force project, and I did have some help. There were people that volunteered to take on some of it. Especially, I should call out the help I got for his time in Latin America because I don't speak Spanish, and there were a few people that absolutely wanted to do the research in these other countries, which was fabulous. I don't know what I would have done without that. Um, so then I put these all into a big spreadsheet, which included the dates, of course, and also the ballparks. And wherever I could, I found the GPS coordinates for all these ballparks, some of which were not hard, like Fenway Park or Yankee Stadium or Sportsman's Park or whatever. But some of them were a little trickier, but anyway, I ended up with using the mapping software, the same mapping software that John uses for the Landmarks Committee. I was able to put all of Paige's games into a map, and this is sort of the map that I have as of now. So just to show you the extremities of the map, there's 3 games in Anchorage there. There's 3 games at Honolulu over on the left. He pitched in Venezuela. That's sort of the southernmost number there. That's a 7. And then he pitched, of course, all over North America into pretty deep into Canada as well. And these are bubbles that if you zoom into the map, which this is not, we're not in the software right now. This is just an image I'm showing. But if within the program, you can zoom in, and these actually have numbers on them. So when you go to the bubble for Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, there's a 58 because he actually pitched in that ballpark 58 times. But some of them are 1s and 2s and 5s and whatnot. But this is where Satchel Paige pitched as of a week ago. This is what I have. Um, So if I zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and I go to Greater Chicago, these are the bubbles I have for Chicago. There is a up at the very top there, you see an eight. That's he pitched in Wrigley Field 8 times. And there's a 24 down in South Side. That's Shoreline Park. That's the place where the White Sox played before Comiskey Park. I think it was called South Side Park. Is that right? Um, and and then be sort of hidden behind that is a bubble there for Comiskey Park where he pitched quite a bit as well. And I think that's Shoebridge Field, maybe south of Comiskey, and maybe Mills Stadium up in the east of or west of Wrigley Field. Anyway, you can zoom in as much or as little as you want. If you zoom in a bit further onto the Wrigley Field page or dot there, you can click on that eight and you will see the data for the very first game he ever pitched in Wrigley Field, which was on May 24th, 1942. I've fixed the abbreviations here. That he pitched for the Monarchs, and the opponent was Dizzy Dean's All Stars. This was a benefit game during the war, and the arrows at the top allow you to scroll through and look at the other 7 games that he pitched in Wrigley Field. So this is kind of how the mapping tool works. So I'll get to more of this shortly. So if I go through this sort of chronologically, and I'm not gonna linger on these maps. You can also look at how you can narrow the map down to a certain year or certain years. Um, to show, or you can say, I just want to see his major league games or his minor league games or his barnstorming games. There's a lot of ways you can slice the map. Um, so the very first section of the map is the 2 years or a year and a month that he spent in Chattanooga pitching for the White Sox, who became the Black Lookouts. As you can tell, it's pretty stable because there was 8 teams in the Negro Southern Leagues, and that's the 8 places he played. And I've got a lot of games for that. Um, and then the next few years, he pitched largely for the Birmingham Black Barons. I say largely. He pitched in the one fall in Cuba. You can see those dots down there. He pitched one early season for the Baltimore Black Sox. That was in 1930. Before returning to the Barons, he pitched the first half of one season for the um, for Baltimore. And I'm not going to get into the complications of why and how all this happened because that's like another book. Um, but with Birmingham, he now is a member of he is now in the major leagues. He's pitching for the Negro National League. And the big numbers on here are St. Louis and Chicago and Detroit and Memphis. And these are the teams at the time that were in the National League. And then there was some spring training and a few other things in here, but that's mostly what he was doing was pitching for Birmingham. And this is how he did during those 4 5 seasons. That include the first year is in the minors, and then most of the time after that, he's pitching for Birmingham and various side projects that he had going. So obviously he was very successful. He's pitching more and more. By the end of this, I will say he is very famous in black baseball circles. If he was coming into Chicago to pitch in a game, the headline would probably say Paige here tomorrow. So by the time he was, 22, 23 years old, he was considered in the newspapers of the time the fastest pitcher in baseball, and maybe some people might even have said that he was the fastest pitcher ever. He was being compared to Rube Waddell, who was um, kind of the model sort of fireballer um, at the turn of the century in Philadelphia for the Athletics. But anyway, he was considered to be, an excellent pitcher, one of the very best pitchers in America, certainly one of the very best Negro Leagues pitchers. And he was, still pretty young. And I'm sort of brushing over the age thing. He was born in 1906. I don't think there's any dispute about that, although um, I think that argument will probably outlive me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. So the first game he ever pitched in Chicago was on August 28th, 1927, and that was at Shoreling. So Shoreling is where the Chicago American Giants played, and the American Giants were the best team in the in the National League for most of the 1920s. That, the founder of the National League. Um, God, why can't I think of his name?
Rube
Rube
Foster.
Foster.
Rube Foster. Sorry, I don't know. Brain lock. Yeah. So Rube Foster founded the league. He ran the Giants, and they were excellent. Foster, by the time Paige came along, Foster was sort of fading away. He died young, and the Giants were not really a big power after that. But they were pretty good still when Paige first got there. The first time he won a game in Chicago, this is 1928. This is his second major league season. He pitched a two-hit shutout there. So in the time that he pitched for the Barons, he pitched 14 games in Chicago, and he was 3-4 his record, but his RA. I don't really have ERA because I can't really do that. I just have he gave up under 2 runs per 9 innings in those games. So I think he pitched pretty well. So something that was fairly new to me not that long ago, at the end of the 1930 season, so he finished the season with Birmingham. And then Chicago signed him just for a few weeks in September. And the reason why they signed him is because the Houston Black Buffaloes, who were in something called I think it was called the Texas Louisiana League, so a minor league, they won that minor league. And then they challenged Chicago to a Negro World Series. So we're the best team. We're gonna beat you, and then we're gonna win the Negro World Series. The funny thing about that is that Chicago finished in fourth in the National League, but the Houston papers still trumpeted this series, which was a 9-game series, 4 games in Houston and 5 in Chicago. I may have that backwards, but they planned this whole series, and the papers referred to it repeatedly as the World Series that they were playing in Chicago. Chicago won most of the games. They signed Paige to pitch in this series, and he actually pitched a couple other games for them because they were playing sort of other games on the side. He pitched a total of 5 games for the American Giants. 3 were part of this World Series thing, and he won all the games, which I guess is not terribly surprising. This was a minor league team, I guess technically. So from 31 to 36, now this is Paige in his late 20s. And if Satchel Paige was the greatest pitcher of all time, or one of the greatest pitchers of all time, or an all-time great pitcher, however you want to say it, then the Crawfords were peak Paige. This was Paige at his best, which makes sense because he was in his mid to late 20s at this point. However, he also knew it, and he did jump the team a number of times. Some of what you see on the map here is not really jumping. Like he went to California every year and pitched in their winter league, which actually was more like a fall league. It was October, mostly through the end of the year, and he pitched there most of the time, and was dominant, as you can imagine. He did jump the team, the Crawfords, in 1933 for a few weeks to pitch for a semi-pro team in Bismarck. And he tried to go the next year again, and they stopped him. The Crawford stopped him. But he went in 35 for the whole year. He essentially didn't pitch for the Crawfords at all. He pitched over 30 games for Bismarck that summer. He also jumped the team to go pitch for the House of Davids to help them win the Denver Post tournament in 1934. So he was doing a lot of this. He also pitched for the Crawfords quite a bit. And these dots around were various times that he was sometimes suspended from the Crawfords, and he would barnstorm as well. And the Crawfords themselves were playing a lot of midweek games against other teams, which is very common in the Negro League. So they would play all their big games on the weekends. Paige would pitch on Sunday, and then on Wednesday he would play in Dayton or Toledo or some other local place. So this is him in these years. And this is his won-loss records, which are pretty gaudy, as you can see. Some of the competition is a little bit lesser. I will say, to stick up for Paige, he was pitching. He was pretty transactional about his career. I mean, he wanted to be paid, and the place that would have paid him the most amount of money was the American and National Leagues, and they wouldn't sign him. So I think he felt like, I'm in charge of my career and I'm going to do whatever I want. And a lot of other people in the Negro Leagues were doing similar things, although nobody really quite as well as Paige, because he was the most marketable person in the league. But anyway, his record as a Crawford against other major league teams was quite good. He was winning 70% of the time, but his record in California or Bismarck was, even better than that. So, and he was pitching a lot, as you can tell. This is a lot of innings for a guy. This is not Kerry Wood. Sorry, too soon. So during his time in Pittsburgh, I left off 35 when he didn't pitch he actually didn't pitch for the Crawfords, in 36 where he didn't pitch in Chicago. I'm not sure why not. Maybe the Giants were gone. Anyway, he did pitch 4 games against the American Giants in Chicago, and he won them, and he had 3 shutouts. So he had some good games, obviously, in Chicago. The other thing he did in Chicago a lot, of course, is the East-West game was at Comiskey Park almost every year. And of course, Paige was often in the East-West game. If you can see that, I can't really tell if you can, but it's a beautiful picture. And Paige is basically dead center in the back. And Gibson is 2 players away from him. Paige pitched, I think, 5 games in Comiskey in the East-West. He would have pitched more, but he was often not with the major league team at the time that the East-West game, and they wouldn't let him come back for it because they were often at odds. And then he had other various protests later. But he was always the guy that they wanted to pitch in the game. I think this picture is from the 50s. Even though it was no longer a major league, I think they were still having East-West games, and they would often get Paige to pitch no matter where he happened to be pitching at the moment. He would come back for it. And this is at Comiskey. So the next couple of years here, I call the wilderness years, because he really took jumping to sort of an extreme. In 1936 or 7, I can't see that. He actually went to the Dominican Republic and pitched for a team in the Dominican, and then the Crawford's owner, Gus Green, was so upset about it. I think he was intending to just go for a couple of months or 6 weeks or something. And he did. But when he came back, he was suspended by Crawford, so he wasn't allowed to pitch anymore in that year. And so instead, he took essentially his team. He had a bunch of other players that jumped with him, and they just barnstormed around in the Midwest instead of pitching in the National League. And the Crawfords then sold him to the Newark Eagles, and they said, we can't handle it anymore. You handle it. So instead of reporting, then Satchel jumped to Venezuela. So he pitched that year in Venezuela and Mexico City, and he also got hurt pretty badly. His arm hurt, really the only injury spoiler of his career, and it was bad enough that he thought he might not be able to pitch again. And I don't think the Negro League magnates were pretty upset with him anyway. So here's how he did in those 2 seasons. So the first year, again, he pitched much less than he normally would because he went to the Dominican and then he didn't have a job essentially when he got back. And then in the next year, he jumped south again, and then he got hurt, and that was kind of that. So he's 31, damaged goods, and now he's suspended by both Negro major leagues. So he essentially doesn't have a job or an arm. So he did get a job. He got a job with the Kansas City Monarchs, who were in the Negro American League, but not as a member of their team. They had a B team, which was a traveling barnstorming team, and they signed him to pitch for that team. And they said, "Well, since your arm's hurt, you can't pitch that much anyway. Just pitch a few innings and travel around, and we'll pay you handsomely. And good luck." And they even changed the name of their team to the Satchel Paige All Stars. And this is what he did basically for 2 years. The first year he spent a lot of time in the Northwest and the upper mountains, and the next year he spent a lot of the time in the Midwest. But he was basically off the grid and not really in the news that much, except locally, for 2 full seasons. And at some point, and the stories differ about when exactly this happened, but at some point his arm started to get better and better and better, and now he's pitching more innings and he's striking everybody out. So at some point, this is how he did in those seasons. As you can see, he's pitching a lot, right? It's like his arm is hurt and he's supposed to be just lobbing the ball in there practically, but he's pitching a lot. He's winning a lot. And at the end of the 1940 season, near the end, I think in September of 1940, he works it out with the powers that be, and he signs with the real Monarchs, and he actually pitched for them at the end of 1940, and then he, of course, he pitched for them for the next 7 years. And this is him during his true Monarchs years. And the Monarchs, like a lot of Negro League teams, especially by the 1940s, were kind of moving around a lot themselves. So they had league games, but then they both hired Paige out, but they also hired out the whole team. If you would pay their fee, they would come to you. And they were doing really well in the league, and of course they won like the 1942 World Series, and they were in a couple other series as well. And he's still going to California. So here's how he did in the 40s largely for the Monarchs. As you can see, he's pitching fewer games as time goes along, but he's in his upper 30s at this point, so it's not terribly surprising that he's has a little less durability. I should mention, though, that through 1947, he's pitched over 1,000 games and has almost 500 wins. This is before he joined the Indians. So during the time he was pitching with Kansas City, he did pitch in Chicago a bunch of times, and that's how he did. And he had a couple of really big games in Chicago, including the very first game I mentioned way back, his first game ever at Wrigley Field, which was on May 24th, 1942. And Dizzy Dean, who is now out of baseball, Dizzy Dean was obviously a great pitcher, but he hurt his arm in 1937, I believe. He's actually younger than Paige, but his major league career is over at this point. I think he's 32. But obviously the season is ongoing, and he's able to barnstorm with a team because he doesn't have a real team. And his major league all-stars were of other people that were ex-major leaguers, and they took on the Monarchs, and this was promoted pretty heavily. And the other big news was that Bob Feller was going to be in this game as well. And Bob Feller was, of course, in the Navy at the time. He was stationed in Newport, Rhode Island, but he got leave to come to Wrigley Field to pitch in this game. And this would have been one of the bigger games of the decade, probably, that these three legendary pitchers would be in this game at this time. And Feller, got permission to do this, and he was going to give all his money to the Navy Relief Fund. However, at the very last minute, his leave was denied, and he actually ended up not pitching in the game or not coming to Chicago at all. And here's a picture of Paige and Dean on that day without Feller. Um, so they did pitch they did play this game, and they had I think 25,000 people, and they majorly outdrew the White Sox, who were playing that day, which ruffled some feathers with Judge Landis. And then the next week, Paige and Dean pitched a game in Washington at Griffith Stadium and had another big crowd. And they had plans to just continue doing this over the summer. But Landis shut it down. He basically told or asked/told all the major league teams and the minor league teams to not allow barnstorming teams to use their facilities because they were interfering with the benefit games that Landis himself was trying to put on, which of course weren't as successful because they didn't have Satchel Paige. But anyway, that got shut down. And Feller, there's every reason to believe that it was Landis that put pressure on the War Department to keep Feller from coming to Wrigley Field as well. So a few weeks later, Paige did win this game against Dean, and a few weeks later, they had another game at Wrigley Field, or I guess a couple of months later, and they named this Satchel Paige Day. So his second game ever at Wrigley Field, they had a day in his honor at Wrigley Field. And he was pitching, obviously for the Monarchs. The Memphis Red Sox were another team in the league. And this is another thing that happened often in the Negro Leagues, is you would have two Negro League teams, but they wouldn't necessarily be playing at one of the home parks. They would move around. They were like a rock band. And Paige, you can see here, is referred to as the conqueror of Dizzy Dean. So this was in July of 1942. The next year, he came back to Wrigley Field and had another Satchel Paige Day. So they really loved him in Chicago. And this was in July of 1943. So if you're scoring at home, he's pitched 3 games at Wrigley Field, 2 of which were days held in his honor. This time, it wasn't even a Monarchs game. It was a game between the Black Barons and the Cincinnati Clowns, and they just hired Paige to pitch for the Barons in the game. And I don't know how that negotiation played out, but it was probably pretty funny. This is now he's joined the American League in 1940. I guess I skipped telling you that. Yes, he signed with Bill Veeck to play for the Indians in mid 1948. And as you can tell, he's pitching in the American League. And here is his map for his American League games. And as you can tell, they had 8 teams at that time, and that's the 8 balloons right there. It's pretty boring compared to his Negro League time. But I should mention that, of course, he pitched for a lot of other places in these years because his stints in Chicago or Cleveland and St. Louis did not take up all of this time. He had a couple of years off in the middle, and he didn't start in 48 until the middle of the season. So he was wandering around, and he still had the off season. So he pitched 10 games as an American leaguer in Comiskey Park. So this would be for either the Indians or the Browns, including his first game as an American leaguer was in August 13th, 1948, his second start. So he was signed in July. He was mostly reliever. He did have a start in against the Senators in in Cleveland. But his second start was in Chicago on August 13th, and he pitched a 5-hit shutout against the White Sox, who were not good, but they were a major league team. And a week later, he pitched against the White Sox again, except this time in Cleveland, and he pitched another shutout, this time a 3-hit shutout. So he really enjoyed facing the White Sox. So this is what he did in those 6 years, including his American League games. So this is the point I made earlier, which I should have made now, which is that he did have a lot of time to kind of wander around. He went to California. He had spring training. He had a couple years in between Cleveland and St. Louis that he was pitching other places. So he was still kind of a wanderer. So this, as a reminder, is roughly ages 42 to 47. So here is how he did and the majority of this one loss is his time in Cleveland, and the first 2 years and the last 3 years is mostly St. Louis, but not all of it. He also pitched for the American Giants again. This is in 1951. So 51, he is between American League jobs. He signed with the American Giants, who this was no longer a major league at this point in 1951, but they still the Negro American League was still moving along and playing baseball games at a lesser level. And they signed Paige, and Paige pitched basically the first half of the season for the American Giants, and he pitched 18 games total. In July, Bill Veeck signed Paige again, so that ended his stint with the American Giants, and he was back in the American League again. So this is Paige for the rest of his life. So this would be after he left the Browns. So the Browns was kind of his last sort of, well, his last real major league job. And for the rest of his life, he was mostly a true barnstormer. The one exception was 1956 to 1958. He pitched 3 seasons for Miami in International League. Those years were relatively stable for him, but the rest of the time he was free to move around. I should mention that he never stopped believing that he didn't deserve to be in the major leagues. So he'd be 60 years old or 55 years old, and he'd be pitching in some practically farmer's field at that point, and he would say, I could pitch. I should be pitching in right now. I should be pitching for the White Sox, or I should be pitching for the Yankees, or something. And to his credit, every time he was given a chance, he did well. The only thing against him was that he kept getting older, and couldn't really help that. So here's how he did over these years. This is age 47 to 70. And the last handful of years on this chart are old timers games. And I put these in there because I told you I was going to do everything, and I did everything. So there are no rules. Okay. People can take this data and decide to ignore the old timers games if they want to, but at least they're here. So he was often affiliated with a team. So he pitched for the Kansas City Monarchs, who was basically a barnstorming team at this point. In 1955, he pitched for the Harlem Globetrotters in 1954. They had their own team as well. He was often pitching for a team, but sometimes he was really just going from town to town and billing himself as the Satchel Paige All-Stars, but oftentimes picking up local people to be on his team. And as the years went on, the ratio between serious competition and entertainment started to blur. And certainly by the end, he was more of going to see Journey at the county fair, where it's like, is this really still the same band? So the peak of that was in 1966 and 7. He's now basically 59, 60 years old. He's pitching for the Indianapolis Clowns, um, who were, I mean, you can see by that poster there. I mean, they actually had a clown, they had a midget, they had a guy with one arm. I mean, it was, I'm not trying to make light of these people, but and they were had some very, very talented baseball players as well. And Paige was he pitched for them, and he often pitched just 1 or 2 innings. Give the guy credit. He's 60 years old. Um, I don't feel so good myself. Um, the poster is from a game in Michigan City, um, Indiana, not Chicago, but he did pitch 2 games for the Clowns at Comiskey Park in 1966 and 67. So in that second game, he's almost 61 years old, and and that was the last year that he really had a job as a baseball player. He pitched a couple of games in spring training for the Braves a couple of years later, and of course he had the old timers games and whatever. But this was the last time he really had a true schedule. Was in 1967. So how many games did he pitch? At the convention, I had the number of 1833, although I now up to 1902. So I've added 69 games in the last 3 months. And the stories of how those, it wasn't like I found 50 games. It really was one at a time. Some of them are from the kindness of other people who did the work for me. Sean Colleget, who's in this call, he found a couple games. Other people have found games, and really, I mean, every game that gets found is helpful. Also, corrections are helpful. You know, I've had people say, actually, it wasn't that park, or the park wasn't there, or I have a box score for that day and I can fill in how many hits and runs he gave up. I mean, every little thing makes it better. I don't know, maybe I'm a B plus now, but every person who is interested in chipping away at this would be much appreciated. I do have a list of about 150 games that I consider to be plausible. And what that means is that I have the game was talked about in the newspaper in the time leading up to the game. So come out to the ballpark tonight and see Satchel Paige pitch. However, there was no follow-up, and I do not count it as a game until I have evidence that the game actually took place and that Paige actually pitched in the game. And sometimes all I know is that Paige pitched in the game. Like I literally know nothing else. I know, boy, that was a good night at the ballpark last night. It was so fun to see Satchel Paige pitch, and that I count as a game. Um, Sometimes I have everything. I have the box score. A lot of times I do. Certainly, especially when Paige was a great pitcher in the 1930s and 1940s. When he pitched, it was a happening, and he was always talked about, and very almost all those games I know about. But after that, it becomes increasingly trickier because they would often not send a reporter to the game. Um, and a lot of games they got rained out, and you just don't know it. And they didn't actually mention in the paper that it got rained out. So it's considered plausible until I have evidence that it did or did not happen. And since I created this help wanted list, I found probably 20 or 25 or 30 games from this list. And I've also found some rainouts or games that happened that I know happened, and I know that Paige did not pitch. You know, 'cause that happens sometimes, that he was injured, or or he just didn't feel like showing up or whatever. I mean, he had his moments, certainly. So that is the extent of the project. It is ongoing. Um, I have found games this week I've been working on, I have another project I'm working on, which is taking up most of my time. But in preparation for this talk, I was at 1899 and I said, I need to find another game so that I can say that I've got a 1900 games. And somewhat surprisingly, I actually went through a couple of those help wanted games, and I just went through the newspapers afterwards that did not have Paige mentioned. I I had not found him by searching, but I found the game by just reading the sports page and later finding his name misspelled or b really blurry, and so the OCR didn't pick it up. Whatever. I'm not sure why, but anyway, I did find a couple of games to go over 1900. So it is fun. If anybody wants to help, or if anybody's interested in this in any other sort of way, that would be great. I'm not sure. I am going to get back eventually to the complete log, um, to to do all the other stuff that Paige was doing. One of the things I found, for example, I just got too bogged down in this, is that for many years, like more than 10, Paige toured with either the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team or a team like the Globetrotters. There were other versions of teams like the Globetrotters back in the 50s and 60s. And Paige was not a player. He would just so this was in the winter. He would be showing up in gyms with the Globetrotters, and he would talk to the people at halftime, and he would be, the person that got the confetti thrown on him or something. And he was kind of like just a part of the gag, but he didn't actually dress down. He said it was too much running. He could never imagine himself playing basketball. But anyway, I thought, oh, this would be cool, because part of the allure of this project at the beginning was like, this guy was probably in more small towns than any person of his generation. And I wasn't even thinking about the winter. He was doing the same thing in the winter that he was doing in the summer in terms of going places. So anyway, so that is what I currently know about Satchel Paige. I I sort of fell in love with his story, his greatness, his vibe. I think he was a phenomenal pitcher who was not a phenomenal pitcher when he was 60, but he was a better 60-year-old pitcher probably than just about anybody else who ever lived. And he was, and that's probably true of just about all his ages. And I think the rest of America, the America that didn't get to see him pitch in his prime, which is most of white America, I certainly missed out on a lot. So that is my talk. I appreciate people listening in. I wish there was audio so I could hear people laughing or yelling or complaining or saying no, that's wrong. But anyway, yeah, I suppose now I'm talking myself into the fact that I like the audio being muted. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Do you have time to answer some questions, Mark?
I got all the time in the world.
Perfect. There's a question in the chat from Paul Julian here in Chicago. He says, "Hi, Mark. Thanks for the invite. Fantastic research. Approximately how many games do you think that Satch won over the 1902 games?" He seemed to think it was maybe about 700.
Yeah. So I didn't show that. I actually showed this in Dallas, but I took it out because my slideshow was humongous, I thought. Um, but I have him for 690 wins. Um, as of the games I have. I don't think there are many more wins left. I think if there are more games left, if my expectation is that additional games that are found um, are going to be from later in his career when he wasn't pitching a lot of innings. So I think wins are just harder to come by at that point. Um, and um I did not employ a 5 inning rule. I actually asked official scorers about this, like Stu Thornley, um, and I came to believe that at the time that people in the newspapers and even people that wrote box scores did not require 5 innings from a starter. And that certainly helped Paige. I mean, he probably would have had several dozen less if I had strictly required 5 innings, because starters in the exhibitions and whatnot that he was pitching at that time, starters simply never went 5 innings. So it would have been sort of unusual, but he probably pitched 500 and he probably won 500 games the old fashioned way, and then another 150 or more, sort of towards the end. So yeah, 700 is pretty close.
All right. It looks like Robert Komorowski, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mark, thank you. Just absolutely wonderful research here. As someone who grew up in the southern suburbs, I noticed that you had on your greater Chicago map, you had two, I believe it's 2 games played in the southern suburbs near South Holland, or could be possibly Harvey. Do you have, what kind of information do you have on those? And what ballpark was that at?
So yes, let me see if I can I need to unshare this just so I can get at my,
Yeah, oh, there you go.
yeah, I'm just going to look at my map because that's where everything is. Um, Actually, no. Yes, they were in Harvey. That's exactly where they were. And I just need to pull up my, I lost it. Okay. Um, do you live near there, or did you used to? So there was a field called Arts Hideaway Field, and I don't know exactly where that was, but he played there in 1959, and he played there twice in 1959, I guess. Um,
What was the name of that field again?
it was Arts, ART apostrophe S, Hideaway Field.
Arts Hideaway Field. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and if you'd like, I can send you, if you draw me an email, I can send you the clips for these games, because I've saved all the newspaper clippings for all my sources. So
Yeah, that would be wonderful, because I went to high school in Blue Island, and Harvey Thornton High School was a major um,
yeah, so
competitor.
one of the most fun parts of this project, honestly, have been the people who have discovered that Paige, pitched in their hometown, and I've had a few people that have said to me, and I'm not being critical at all. I don't remember my childhood either, but they've said, I lived there at that time, and I can assure you that Satchel Paige never pitched here. And I sent them the newspaper clipping of the game that he pitched there. I mean, that's all I know, right? I mean, I wasn't there, and they've written back and said, "Well, son of a gun, I guess he did pitch here." So I also ran into this guy on Facebook because I've been jumping into local Facebook groups when I've been had these mysteries, and when I say local Facebook groups, I mean groups that are like devoted to the hometown of this place. And I've jumped in and talked about the project and this game that I'm trying to research. And I ran into this guy who was actually toured with Paige on the Clowns. He was one of the catchers. So he remembered a lot of these games, which was fabulous. And to make you realize how close everything is. I mean, it sounds like the idea that somebody toured with a Satchel Paige, he must be 100 years old, but he's not. He's like 75 or something, because he was a teenager, or he was 18 when he toured with Paige. And so there are people who are in their 70s who saw Paige pitch, and maybe even played in a game against Paige. So these people are still around. Not in his glory years, unfortunately, but in some of his earlier years. So
Yeah, it looks like Tom McIntyre, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah. So I was looking at some of the numbers you showed, and I'm like, my goodness, this guy seems like really durable. But, and I know like in the American National Leagues back then, it was normal to pitch 9 innings in a game. But you said on some of the barnstorming games, it's normal to pitch more like 3 innings or something. So I'm wondering just like how often did he pitch, and was he throwing complete games, or did he just, because he just like sensationally durable as a pitcher, or what do we know about that?
So I think he was sensationally durable, but it was maybe less durable than you would think just looking at the game total. Because um, if you think of this as a transition between Satchel Paige being a member of a team that's trying to win the pennant, in which case he was kind of in a rotation, and there were other good pitchers on the team, and he was pitching. He was, likely the best pitcher on the team, but he was pitching a couple times a week when he was in his prime. However, as he became, um, especially when he was barnstorming, I mean, for economic reasons, they were playing 4 or 5 times a week. And you couldn't promote the game and say Satchel Paige is on the team and he may or may not pitch. You had to
Hmm.
essentially tell these people he was going to pitch. And so I mean, they literally would have contracts that say, we will not pay you if Satchel Paige does not pitch. And sometimes it would be he has to pitch at least N innings. And that N would be three, maybe. And then as he got older, it might have even been one or two. So he had to pitch. But he wasn't the $6 million man. So he couldn't pitch every inning. But
Right.
he could pitch multiple times a week. Um, so to answer your question, when he was barnstorming, he generally had to pitch fewer innings because he had to pitch the next day
And
again.
they want to play as many games as they can to make
They
as much
wanted to
money as
play
they
because
can.
they were, yeah, they were, if they were touring in Illinois, and they were playing in Peoria, and 2 days later they were playing in Springfield, and somebody offered them a gig to go up to, I don't know, I'm running out of Illinois knowledge,
Mhm.
Urbana. And if they said you can play in Urbana and this day in between, they weren't going to say no. They were going to say
Okay.
yes, and they were going to figure out a way to have Paige pitch in all of these games. And this is like when and then occasionally there would be a game where some promoter would say, "We'll pay you." This happened in the early 60s, so he's like, 55 or something. Um, um, and there was some promoter that basically said, we'll pay your team this amount of money, but we will pay you in addition to that, like $50 an inning. And he pitched a complete game. It's like, so yeah, so he was limited. And when he was pitching for the Crawfords or the Barons or the Monarchs and they're trying to win games, it was different. But once he was it was more the Sassel Page show, then he couldn't pitch as much generally. But he still pitched a lot more than
Yeah.
anybody's pitching today. And he did, I mean, also, I heard accounts from people again, this is near the end, when he was not throwing 90 miles an hour by then. So he was just doing what he could to get through the inning or two. Um, so
It's Sean, it looks like you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, so I don't know if you touched on this in Dallas, but I saw Alaska and Hawaii on there on the map. Do you have them pitching in all other 48 states?
um, I do not. He did not pitch, and I looked at this pretty extensively. Um, he did not pitch in Maine, New Hampshire, or Vermont. And when I say I looked at it extensively, I sort of, you're able to, since he's spending most of his time in a car, so you kind of knew that, if he was in the Southwest, that he wasn't going to zip up to Maine for the weekend. So the game, but the times that he was in New England, I looked pretty extensively for times that he could have zipped up there, and I wasn't able to find it. And I did run into a guy, Merritt Clifton, who is from that area, and he said that he spent a lot of time looking for Paige in Vermont and in New Hampshire and Maine years ago, and he never found it either. So I don't think he did. And so that isn't terribly surprising, I suppose. The one the one other place that I have not found a game from is New Mexico. And that is a more of a surprise because he'd be traveling through the Southwest and he'd play in Phoenix and then he'd play in El Paso. And I think, come on, you could have, tell me. So he had at least one like no-show game that I found. Like he was supposed to pitch in Los Alamos or somewhere, um, and something happened. Either he was hurt or something like that, but he wasn't able to pitch. And he claimed that he pitched in all 50 states. He claimed a lot of things, but it made me sort of look extra hard for it. And Jacob Pomranke, I don't know if he's on the call, but he did mention at some point that he was gonna give a reward to anybody that could find a New Mexico game because I think Tracy's from New Mexico, so it's possible. I know he was in New Mexico. I found him um, in one of his basketball events in New Mexico. So maybe I'll find that newspaper clip and frame it for him.
Well, let me ask you this. I know that Paige has been researched and written about extensively. There are a whole slew of legendary and funny tales about him. Is there anything you've come across in your research, some kind of nugget or interesting or fascinating thing that you hadn't seen before?
Um, yeah, well, there's a lot of things. Because I will tell you, I will confess that, my knowledge of Satchel Paige when I started this project was, um, very high for like a regular human being, but not necessarily high for like a baseball historian, right? I kind of like had read the basic texts on him, and part of I mean, almost most of my research projects that I've done over the years have been like because I'm trying to figure something out myself, and then I just sometimes other people are interested too. And so I really started this because I was trying to figure it out. Um, so I'm saying all that because some of the things that I discovered may not have been new to other people. One of the more interesting games that I ran across, and I don't know why I didn't know about this because it seems like it should have been a bigger deal. Um, Paige was signed by the Indians in July of 1948 to finish out that season, which, of course, they won the World Series, their only World Series victory in the last 105 years. I should mention, but so he was signed in July, and then a couple of weeks after he was signed, I think he'd only pitched one game at this point, was the All-Star game. And either the day before or the day after the All-Star game, I'm not sure which, there was an exhibition game, which teams used to have during the season. They would play like their AAA team or something like that. So, well, this was an exhibition game in Cleveland that Bill Veeck arranged against the Brooklyn Dodgers. So there were two major league teams that just in the middle of July had an exhibition game at Cleveland Stadium. And what was interesting about it, of course, historically, was that Paige pitched in the game, as did Larry Doby, as did Jackie Robinson, as did Roy Campanella. And I mentioned those four people because they were at the time the only four black players in the major leagues. That was it. There were four of them. They all pitched in this game, exhibition game. If you read the accounts of this in the papers, either Brooklyn or Cleveland, this was not remarked upon. They never remarked upon in the newspapers the fact that, oh, by the way, even like Jackie Robinson's first game, if you read the account of that, it's like, hey, Jackie Robinson, the new Dodger first baseman, got a hit. There was nothing ever really dramatic. They didn't play up the fact that this was historically interesting. So I guess maybe I don't know. It just seems odd to me that this is not an event that would have been recorded. It took me a while to try because I was trying to figure out whether Paige pitched against Robinson or Campanella in the game. I don't believe that he did, but they all played, and so it's pretty crazy. So there are a lot of games like that that I just said like, how didn't I know this? There was a really cool story where when he was in Alaska, which was, I think, in 1963, 64, something like that. So Paige is, near the end of his baseball career. And the story, which made all the papers for days, was because at the same time that he was in Alaska, Richard Nixon, who at the time was unemployed, um, was on a flight coming back from Tokyo, I believe, for some kind of foreign policy seminar or something. And they stopped in Anchorage to refuel. And Nixon like pulls in to this airport, and I don't know what kind of plane he was on, but he pulls into the airport and there was like this big commotion in the airport. And he goes, "Hey, what's going on over there?" And his people said, "I'll go check it out." And they got off the plane, they went over to one of the gates and they said, "Oh, they're all waiting for Satchel Paige. He's about to come in from wherever Paige was coming from." And Nixon goes, "I want to get off the plane. I want to talk to Satchel Paige." So Nixon does. He gets off the plane. Now he is now ex-vice president at this point, so not, probably didn't have Secret Service around, but he does. He meets Paige, and there's a big, they talk to, the people didn't expect to have Nixon there, and they asked Nixon, and he goes, "God, I've always wanted to meet Satchel Paige. This is quite the honor." And I think Paige sort of assumed that, yeah, it kind of was an honor for him to meet me. Um, and and I know about this story because it was, it made the wire, and then it was in all the papers for a while after that. And I thought that was pretty cool that the future president would run into him. So yeah. So, if you do any newspaper research, a lot of times the stuff that is fun is the stuff that you aren't even looking for, that's like on the page too. Um, and if you search for something like Satchel Paige, Paige is a fun person to search for because once he became famous, he wasn't that difficult to find because no one else had the name Satchel, let alone Paige. I mean, they were both sort of not common names, so you could kind of run into them. I think if you were looking for Ted Williams and Jackie Robinson, you get a lot of hits that you don't really want. So yeah.
So what is the end game here with regard to publishing this, putting the map out for public consumption? What's the plan?
Uh, so the map is out for public consumption. Um, if somebody, I can probably put it in the chat where it is. See, unless somebody gets to it before me. Yeah, I'll send you to the landing page, which is uh, where there's sort of an explanation of how to use the map, which is at my website. But the map is there for anybody to see. And it's really fun. I mean, I love the map. And, John helped me sort of set that up, but it works. It's much like the landmarks map. I think if your brain thinks that way, and I just love maps, I always have. I think the thing I love about the landmarks project is it sort of allows us to sort of think about this baseball research world sort of in a new way, spatially. I think we tend to think of it more chronologically, baseball history, but spatially is kind of fun. And the idea that you can sort of drive around looking at this stuff, and some of my sort of people that are nerds in the same way that I am, like Jacob. Jacob immediately said, like, "That's it. We need to, like, find all the ballparks and make a circuit that people can follow, that would just allow them to sort of just see 25 Satchel Paige parks. And according to Jacob, there are over 90 parks in my data that still exist for baseball that Paige pitched in. Some of them like Fenway Park, obvious, or Rickwood Field, but a lot of them are some in small towns, and they're still being used for community college baseball or something. I was in a park in North Bend, Oregon, and I was on a little bit of a guy's road trip, and we stopped there because someone said, "Hey, there's a really old baseball park there, Clyde Allen Field, and which is really, beautiful. It's from like the 40s, and you guys should stop and look at it." So before I did that, I looked and discovered that yes, Paige had pitched there in like the early 50s, and I thought this is great. And I went down and I met people that were like the groundskeepers, and they just were like in love with this park. It was like they were retired. They just thought this was like they got the greatest job ever. They knew every single thing about the park. And I said to the guy, one of the guys, I said, "Did you know that Satchel Paige pitched here?" And the guy just about lost it. He could not believe that he did not know this. They actually had signage at the park. They had a picture of Chet Lemon because they were an affiliated minor league team for a year or two. I guess for the White Sox, I guess that would be. In the mid 70s. And so there's a picture of a couple of major leaguers that had played there and everything. He couldn't believe that Paige had pitched there. So when I got home, I sent him the information, and he said, "Yeah, we're gonna change our plaque." So yeah, we can change the world with this. I'm telling you. Um, but yeah, there are a lot of. I think one of the this is a joke that someone said to me about the Landmarks project once, which I can share to John, is that someone said like, "If thanks to guys like you, we'll never be able to tear anything down ever again." Um, and maybe that's true.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, Mark. Thanks again for doing this for Chicago and for everybody else here. As far as people wanting to contact you if they do know of something that's not on your list, is there a way to do that through your website
Um,
or just through
Probably,
SABR?
but
Yeah.
you can just send me an email. I will put that in the chat. But yeah, I mean, anybody that has any other questions, comments, improvements, ideas. Uh, Also, I should have mentioned this in the beginning. I've been trying to tell other people this. Like most things that I've sort of done, I've said this about. I said this about the bio project at the beginning. It's like, this you can create a project like this yourself too. If you want any help, if you want to do the Babe Ruth project, um, and figure out all the places that Babe Ruth played. I mentioned Babe Ruth because he, like Paige, actually did travel around, right? So there is some fun to that. It's doing the Dustin Pedroia project wouldn't be that fun because it's so everything is so documented that it's not really it wouldn't take you that long to do. But someone like Ruth would be the perfect counterpart to Paige. Of course, other Negro leaguers. Paige, the advantage with Paige um, is that as the pitcher, he would often be mentioned in the paper. There'd be a two-paragraph story, but they might have a line score, and you'd see Paige's name. If Josh Gibson um, played in the game and he was 1 for 4 with a double, he might not even be mentioned, right? Because that was just a regular game, and they don't mention. If he had 2 home runs, it'd be mentioned, but he might not be mentioned. Whereas Paige was essentially always mentioned, so Gibson would be harder. I don't think that's a reason to not do it, though. I really don't. I think if you did a project like this for Josh Gibson and you only found 85% of his games instead of 98% of his games, that's still really cool. So I really don't think the work that I've done here honestly is that difficult. I think it's just it takes uh it takes sort of perseverance and stick to itiveness, but it doesn't really take like genius. It's just like you just got to keep going. And there's no deadline. That's my favorite projects. It's like I don't feel like working on it today and or tomorrow or next week. I just but honestly, it's been more fun than not. So if anybody wants to replicate this, and and the map does a lot of the work for you too. I mean, it's like I remember I asked John if he would help me kind of get this into a map, and he told me what I needed in my spreadsheet, and I got it done, and I put some GPS in. You don't even need that, because if you know if you know that this happened in Cleveland, it will just put him in the middle of Cleveland. If you have more, it will use it. But if you don't, it'll just say Cleveland. That's close enough. I'll put you downtown. And that's not too bad. But anyway, John and I were on the phone, and John said, okay, I'll load this up for you. And he shared his screen, and he put it up, and I was like, oh my God. I was like just as surprised as everyone else when they saw the map for the first time. It's like, wow, this is incredible. I just have this boring raw data with a bunch of letters and numbers in it. And then the map, suddenly it's like, oh my God, this is incredible. I can't believe Paige did all this. So I don't know. It's pretty cool, pretty fun.
All right. Well, I appreciate you doing this again. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'm sure we're going to find several hundred more games for you over the next few years. We're going to keep you busy, Mark.
Doesn't have to be for me, it's for everybody.
Right. Right.
It's a public project. But yeah, no, I appreciate it. And like I said, other people have helped. And it's great. Glad.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Catch you on the
Thank
next one.
you.
Thank you.